Welcome to GTN's Coach's Corner. This week we're going to be looking at why in swimming more effort doesn't always translate to more speed, how you can improve your body's ability to use fat as fuel, and then dialing into heart rate and looking at fluctuations and what might be normal. Well, if you have a burning question you want us to answer, you just need to leave that in the comment section below this video or any other video using that hashtag GTN Coach's Corner. Now, before we dive into your question, just a quick reminder that if you click on that subscribe button now, you'll make sure you'll get all of our videos from GTN and you won't miss a one. But our first question for this week's Coach's Corner comes from David Fritz, and he has this to say. I'm very much a steady runner and a respectable cyclist, but a fairly poor swimmer. I've noticed that when I try harder, I don't actually get any faster, which would be fine if I was fast, but I'm not. Is the reason for this possibly poor breathing technique? I mean, I'm guessing I'm breathing more often, and the lack of form causes more frequent breathing to slow me down and create net zero change in pace. Any tips for fixing this, or whatever else the problem might be? Well, David, this does sound very much like you're spot on. It is a technique issue. And when it comes to swimming, so much of it is technique that if you're doing something slightly wrong when you're swimming steady, on the whole, when you start to go faster, moving your arms faster, or just trying to work harder, that problem becomes exacerbated. So say, yes, it is your breathing and you're turning your head too far, for example. You'll want more breath. If you try and work harder, you're more likely to turn your head further, and this can start to send your body off center line. There could be a lot of things, though, that are going on with your stroke when you're trying harder. For example, if you're not really dialing in that catch and you haven't got hold of the water at the front of the stroke, then if you try and pull your hand through faster, because you're thinking you're going faster with your arms, you'll go faster overall. But actually, you're just going to be slipping the water. You could well be bringing your arm out of the water sooner, so you're not finishing your full stroke. So yes, your arms are going quicker, but you wouldn't be in that situation. So there's a lot of things that could be happening, and obviously without seeing you, we can't say exactly. But with that in mind, I would suggest going back to really trying to dial in that technique. We've got plenty of swim technique videos, so take a look at those. And if you do have the opportunity to get someone to maybe analyze your stroke, both when you're swimming slowly and when you're swimming fast, or sorry, trying harder, as you say, there is no change in pace. And if you do have the opportunity, getting a coach or someone to actually watch firsthand is probably your best point of call for that. But I would say go back to working on the technique and doing some drills, slowing it all down, and then working on doing some more mileage, which will help to increase your fitness, and hopefully naturally you'll become more economic as you go. So good luck with that one. Right, next we have this one from Michael Fretz. I recently completed a VO2 max test in the lab. Since I do a lot of endurance sport, it was suggested that I try to increase the size of my fat max zone. He says in brackets, when I'm burning more fat than carbs as a fuel source. Currently, my fat max zone equates to the heart rate of 90 to 115 beats per minute. How exactly can I train my body to burn mostly fat over a larger range? Thanks. Well, Michael, first up, it's not actually that much evidence you can increase your fat max zone by a huge amount. So you're probably better off trying to actually work on your aerobic capacity so that, say, working between 90 and 115 beats per minute, you become more efficient so you can run at a faster pace while still keeping your heart rate in that current zone that is your fat max zone. Beyond that, you can do other things such as working out that you're doing your training when you're glycogen depleted. So you might already be doing this, but doing fasted training, training sort of at the end of the day, maybe when you've not eaten as much for a while, and also fueling on foods that aren't high in carbohydrates, as well as the type of training you're doing. So a lot of work in that zone. The longer you're spending there, the more your body will start to adapt to that type of training. But we'd also question, what are you trying to gain from this? Because if you're trying to increase your VO2 max and you do a lot of endurance stuff and you want to get faster and more efficient, then you might want to look at why you're actually not using carbohydrates as well. And there's a lot of evidence that practicing taking on the carbohydrates whilst training can help you to carry on at a higher level and help you work at a higher intensity. So it's a big a big topic there, but if purely you're looking at staying in that fat max zone, I would recommend just working more in that and working aerobically so you can become more efficient. Hopefully that one helps, but interesting topic. Okay, now we have this from Charlie Yin. I have a question about resting heart rates, maximum heart rates and heart rate ranges. I'm a 25-year-old male who does a fair amount of exercise. I've noticed that I've got a very low resting heart rate in the mid-30s, but I struggle to get my heart rate anywhere near what is my theoretical max. The highest my heart rate's been in the last 2 years during an activity is 175, which really feels like an all-out effort for me. Is this normal? Is there a way that I can get my heart rate higher? And should I be concerned about having such a low maximum heart rate? Well, Charlie, we actually had a question on the opposite end of the scale just a few weeks ago, someone worrying that their resting heart rate was too high. And our point then and our point now is that everyone is individual and you don't need to be comparing each other to each other. It's more about keeping an eye on what's normal for you and noticing any changes in that. And your heart rate being in the mid-30s for your age is perfectly fine. And when it comes to the upper end, it might be worth doing an actual all-out max test if you want to see how high you can get your heart rate, because you probably can get a little bit higher than that if that's just purely from a training session as opposed to something where you're aiming to reach that. But at the end of the day, it's noticing your training zones and working within those. So if you can go and do a lactate threshold test or a heart rate test, or even if you can go into the lab, you're more likely to get a far more accurate estimation of what your maximum heart rate would be and then where your zones are, and they will be more accurate that way. But I would just say that you're saying what you think is normal or average, and I know that we do that generic 220 minus your age, but that is such a generic figure. It's just to give us a really rough idea. So don't get bogged down on what's normal. Just try and dial in what yours is, what your zones are, and then work to optimize those. Well, sticking with heart rate, we've got another question here from Francois Revoire. Francois says, I have a fairly stable resting heart rate of 40 beats per minute. Pretty much every time I go out to a restaurant though, and have just one alcoholic drink, my resting heart rate shoots up by 8 to 10 beats the next day. I'm wondering what causes this. Could it be sodium, alcohol, overeating, extra calories, etc.? Additionally, if it is food consumption related, can this spike also happen if I poorly feel during hard or long trainings or race? I don't usually see this amount of change during regular training. Well, Francois, it probably is one of those factors, if not a combination of several of them. And first up, it's great that you notice such small fluctuations and you're really in tune with your body and you're keeping a check on your heart rate, because a fluctuation of around 8 to 10 beats can be notable. And quite often, if you take away those factors, it could indicate that your body is either maybe a bit fatigued or fighting something. And with the resting heart rate in the morning, it might mean you need to back off training. But if you know that this always happens from this situation and you still feel fine in yourself, then it's probably just something worth noting and then saying, okay, this is now my normal after that situation, and you can go ahead and train as usual. But into those points is a few things that it could be. For example, alcohol is a diuretic. I know you've only had one drink, but it depends if you're very sensitive to alcohol. Could make you slightly dehydrated, and that's proven to raise your heart rate. I don't know how late you're staying out until, so maybe you've had less sleep, or maybe you've just not slept as well because you've had a heavy meal. And that can all affect your heart rate in the morning and just the stress on your body and how well you've recovered from that day's training. And you don't mention the training you've done in that day. Maybe the nights you go out, if you look back at your training diary, do you train really hard that day because then you're having a bit of a rest the next day because you're planning that evening? So there could be some other factors, but just make sure that you do carry on keeping an eye and monitoring like you are. And then I think if that is your normal for that situation, what I would say is that's what's important. And going back to that previous answer as well, all of our heart rates are different and our bodies react differently. So just being aware of it is really great. But I think that just takes me back to the point that we're all individual, like I said in the last point. And if you know that that is normal for you, then don't worry about it, but just bear it in mind when you're planning your training for the next day. And maybe if you do have a really hard session, it might not be the best preparation for that, and maybe move that a day or two. Well, some really interesting questions there, and hopefully I've answered those for you guys. And if anyone else watching has gone, oh yes, I've got a question that I want to have answered, well, you know what to do. Just leave it in the comment section below this video using that hashtag GTN Coaches Corner, and we will answer it in one of our upcoming episodes. Hopefully you have enjoyed this. Hit that like button if so, and remember there's the globe to click on to subscribe.